The launch of Claude 3.7 is really underlining for me that we need better evals or better evaluations for AI models. Right now, I think models are very overfitted to the evaluations that are widely published, like the AIME. And so all of these models score incredibly well on these widely known evaluations, but it's because they are trained from the get-go to be good at the evaluations. And that's sort of circular, isn't it? And if you want to sort of take a step back and think about what Satya Nadella was saying when he talked about wanting models to do economically useful work, it's a bit of a nod in that direction, right? Like the models are very good at this benchmark or that benchmark, but are they actually doing work that's meaningful? And because there are not great benchmarks for meaningful work, probably the closest is a brand new benchmark that just came out called, I think it's Lancer, which is something that ChatGPT is maintaining. Really, independent orgs should maintain these, but right now, OpenAI is maintaining this one. And it's designed to measure a model's ability to independently complete freelance work. That's probably the closest to measuring real work. And Claude 3.5, not even 3.7, Claude 3.5 did very, very well on that, scored the highest so far on that. And I think that that's an example of what I mean when I say even if the models all score very similarly on these academic benchmarks, in the real world, doing real world work, like what Lancer is trying to measure or what I hope other benchmarks will emerge and measure, the models are different. The models are not the same. And right now, we're referring to this as like the vibes of the model, the impression the model gives you when you work with it. And unfortunately, it means that people like me who spend a lot of time playing with AI models become effectively, without wanting to, gatekeepers of this implicit information. Like I sit there and I understand intuitively as soon as I touch Claude 3.7, this is how it feels different from 3.5. This is how it feels different from the ChatGPT models. But it's really difficult to convey that in a way that's useful to people who have different lines of work. And I think that's something that the industry as a whole is really struggling with right now. I will say from my perspective for 3.7, they're doing a classic challenger brand play, and they're really focused on what Claude has historically been fantastic at, which is coding and building. And so if you look at where they've prioritized making 3.7 available, it's aimed specifically at coding and building. It's available in the terminal. It's available right away in Cursor. It's available with a GitHub integration in the ChatGPT app. They want you to build with this model. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Challenger brands typically specialize, and that's sort of how they win in the space. And larger brands like ChatGPT typically have to generalize, and they have to make their value proposition coherent, which is part of why ChatGPT has been investing in GPT-5, because they have to take this whole half dozen models and make them into one coherent model that everyone understands what it is for a generalized audience. I would expect that 3.7 would continue the tradition of Claude punching above its measurement weight. 3.5 remained a favored coding model for 9 or 10 months after it was released, despite all the other models that were released along the way. 3.7, having played with it, having looked at how much better it feels than 3.5, I suspect it will have the same fate. I think it will be a very popular coding model for a long time. I'm going to see if I can code up and sort of give some examples later today on the Substack of sort of what it's like, how 3.7 compares to 3.5. And I want to make it really tangible. I want you to see the difference given the same prompt of how these models react and especially how they build. That's my attempt to show how they do economically useful work. But again, we really need independent benchmarks that help us to figure this out. It's not something that individuals can really do. It really shouldn't be something that model makers do, because model makers, even if they try not to be, inherently kind of biased, right? They just are. Like, I have no doubt that the reason OpenAI launched the freelancer benchmark is because they expect to beat it with ChatGPT 4.5 or maybe with ChatGPT 5. That's why you would pay to maintain and sort of drive that benchmark. And benchmarks are not free. It takes a lot of work to maintain them. And we desperately need more benchmarks that are real world. And right now, organizations that could pay, like companies, they have no incentive to share how they're using this for economically useful work because that's a secret sauce for the company. Why would you share it? And so we're sort of in a situation where no one who has the money has the incentive to develop and set up an independent evaluation for economically useful work. And it would be really helpful if we had that. So I don't know what the answer there is. If you magically have a few $1,000,000 and you're listening to this, set up a benchmark. Set up a benchmark. I think it would be something that the rest of the world would really appreciate. And if you don't, you can join me in asking and wishing that people would. Cheers.